Hello everyone, welcome back. This is going to be the final video that I have planned for this series of videos looking at the Miko buffs and how they affect various team archetypes. So I first want to thank you all for your support and of course your discussions in the comments section about these archetypes that I've been talking about. After this, of course, I'll start talking about some Sandy shenanigans because obviously the Miko buffs were made largely in service of those upcoming Snezhnaya teams. But as I've been trying to show in this series, it turns out that we still have been seeing a major boon for all these other teams that we might consider playing anyway with the illustrious in the extreme, Her Almighty Highness, the God of SAS, Yae Miko, the Wise and Beautiful. In this video, we're going to be talking about Electro carries specifically in the context of Aggravate teams. So this video is going to be different to the Dendro video because in these teams, we're going to have more Electro characters in these teams, i.e. 2 with Miko, and we're going to bring along supports that actively favor those Electro characters instead of the Dendro characters on the team who will pretty much always be Nahida. I'm going to focus on 2 characters in particular, and that's Lisa and Clorinde, because these 2 are by far my favorite Aggravate characters in the game. But I suppose if you're a Cyno or Sethos main, this video will still be relevant for you since I feel like they're designed pretty much for this kind of gameplay. Cyno not so much though, obviously with the SuperConduct buffs, but prior to that he was still more of a quick bloom kind of character. I feel like everything I say about Clorinde, unless stated otherwise, would be relevant for them as well. So in this video we're going to actually be talking about pretty much every buff that came to Miko that isn't directly and exclusively tied to SuperConduct, despite some of these buffs not being wholly relevant in previous videos. 24-second turret duration, 24-second Kategari's duration, triggering a SuperConduct making the next turret hit get plus 80% attack scaling, as well as of course the C1 triggering SuperConduct giving the team plus 50 Electro percent, ults not destroying turrets, C2 giving 200 EM for Miko and the on-fielder, and of course C4 giving plus 8 energy whenever a turret hits an enemy, and of course plus 100 ult percent. So this video is probably going to be a little longer and of course more comprehensive than the other ones, but before we continue, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because your support can always help combat the YouTube algorithm. There is one buff that Miko got that doesn't actually affect these teams, and I want to talk about it, because it's actually a great frustration of mine that ever so slightly tarnishes an otherwise amazing set of buffs for Miko. If you read her new A1 passive, it says that when there's 3 turrets around, using her skill again causes an additional lightning strike that has a 40% attack scaling. Throughout the beta, I thought this was our answer to Undone Be Thy Simple Hex, but as it turns out, it's not. This attack does not apply element. And to make matters worse, this thing doesn't even count as any kind of damage, so it's not affected by skill percent or even ult percent or anything of the sort. This is why despite my turrets doing 15k base damage, these extra hits only do around 4k. In Aggravate teams, this attack does nothing extra and therefore there is no specific rush to EEE while your turrets are still active. Ulting while they're still active remains important, but not the EEE thing. This thing is very much meaningless. I was really hoping that this was some hilarious oversight by Hoyo, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So this part of the passive is rather pointless, and instead it's just the SuperConduct part of the passive, that version anyway, that remains quite important instead. We'll see if Rimegrass somehow makes this 40% attack scaling Electro damage meaningful, but I doubt it. First off, let's talk about the Kategari's duration buff. Obviously this is a big deal for Miko's kit with the turret duration buff, but it's also a big deal for Nahida and to some extent Lisa. It takes 15 seconds minimum for Nahida to get all 3 stacks, so having a much longer time where Nahida doesn't need to come back on field and still maintain those 3 stacks is going to be a huge quality of life buff right there. Lisa can get all 3 stacks very quickly with 2 tap skills and then a hold skill, but her hold skill has a 16-second cooldown, so the longer Kategari's buff means that you can still maintain all 3 stacks without having to use something like TF. Remember, skill usage refreshes all stacks of the Kategari's buff. Should the day arise where somehow Lisa can do direct SuperConduct damage, well then the Kategari's buff would also affect her, but until then, that part is just primarily a Miko thing. Meanwhile, there's the 24-second turret duration. Now, there are 2 Aggravate teams in particular that I've been looking into for this video, and one of them is just a couple of Aggravate Clorinde variants, and the other one is international. International is very quick swappy, so this turret duration buff isn't absolutely necessary, but it's certainly giving us a lot of leeway to enjoy our characters in a more casual sense. If anything, it gives us more time to play with on-field Lisa instead of having to swap around in a mad sort of way. Instead, let's have a look at the various versions of Clorinde Aggravate. What the 24-second turrets immediately open up for Clorinde is the ability to play TF Clorinde and actually let her have 2 rounds of her shooting, which is pretty much what I'd be calling living the dream. Being able to shoot via her skill, then ult, then shoot via her skill again because of Thundering Fury and an Aggravate team is pretty much the way to go. But as it turns out, we actually have some other problems that need solving. The first one is Shillidan. If you want to bring Shillidan, since she is in fact the strongest support we have available right now, Miko's extended duration kinda doesn't matter anymore because Shillidan's buffs last 15 seconds for the red shred and 20 seconds for scroll. No matter how you play Clorinde, her on-field time will be longer than that. You could refresh Shillidan's buff after you use Clorinde's ult, but that kind of makes the whole thing a bit longer and it does break the dream of Aggravate Clorinde. And as it turns out, making that rotation a little bit longer does end up with a 25-second rotation, give or take, which does mean that Miko's turrets actually expire at the very end. The other problem is Nahida. The Shrine of Maya has a similar issue in that it has a 15-second duration at base. Without any Hydra characters on the team, obviously the Shrine is just not going to last long enough. Well, if you have C1 Nahida, well, this does go up to 21 seconds because you get a free, quote-unquote, free Hydra character, so that can last Clorinde's on-field time at the very least. But if you want to use Miko's ult, there's a good defense chance you can't fit all of that in within the Shrine's duration. Also, if you're using Kagura's, the buff only lasts for 24 seconds and Nahida does need at least 15 seconds to build up the 3 stacks of this weapon. So this might really be the moment to consider something like 1000 Floating Dreams instead of Kagura's on Nahida, or hell, Witsith even? I don't know. Finally, of course, there's also Miko herself. Like I mentioned, this rotation seems to be around 25 seconds, though her turrets might not even last long enough. Although, to be fair, Miko's turrets disappearing at the very end of the rotation, not necessarily the end of the world, since we could just EEQ again, thanks of course to her ult not destroying turrets. So what can we do about it? If you want to play the absolute best in slot Clorinde Aggravate team, then it does seem like dropping the TF Dream and running Whimsy is pretty much the way to go. But if you want to embrace the dream, well, it does seem like the solution will have to end up being someone like Zhongli, whose shield lasts for 20 seconds, or barring that, C2 Farina, where sure you'll lose out on the red shred, but Clorinde's healing alone can actually max out your fanfare, so you get a whole lot of damage percent for everyone on the team. But I think the character that I somehow prefer the most is actually C2 Baiju. First, you get some big heals, if you actually need them, which I sometimes do. Secondly, my Baiju permanently holds Deepwood, so Nahida can run Golden Troop instead. My GT build does have way less EM in favor of way more crit though, so I do end up with a slight DPS increase. On top of that, it's C2 Baiju, so there's permanently available off-field Dendro, to the point where not even ulting with Baiju is actually a DPS buff. I kind of do have to cut Clorinde's on-field time by a couple of seconds afterwards though, just so I don't lose Nahida's Kagura buffs, but that's if I want to use Baiju's entire kit. All of this to say, if you're not in the business of playing the most fun character in the game in the most fun way possible, then sticking with Whimsy means you can play her with the best in slot characters. But if you want to enjoy the most Clorinde possible, well, it does seem like we do have a couple of options available, but the team is a little bit scuffed. One potential solution that is coming the next patch is, of course, Odette, who will not only open up the SuperConduct part of this team, but also has a skill that lasts around 20 seconds, so that's going to be the same duration as Zhongli, so we'll have to revisit this when she comes out. Now, real quick, I just wanted to show how a rotation feels for both Cyno and Sethos mains, since when it comes to this part of their gameplay, their rotations can actually be quite faster than TF Clorinde's, and in Cyno's case, it could potentially be faster than Whimsy Clorinde as well. And obviously, you'll notice that in this video, I didn't really bother recording any B-roll footage for them, at least as of recording. I might actually record some later, but either way, for the Cyno mains, I just want to point out as well, I seem to be getting a DPS loss by using his ult, so that's hilarious. Let me know in the comments, Cyno mains, if you're getting a similar result.
Thank you, I'm always watching. Right here, right now. Let's keep hearing the list. Make yourselves a room. Right now.
Excuse me. Prestigious wisdom.
Whoa. Right here. Nothing lasts forever. Nothing lasts forever.
Now, I just mentioned Stellar Conduct, so let's segue into talking about how triggering a SuperConduct can give a bunch of buffs. The first buff is additional attack scaling to the next turret hit from Miko. With a 2.5 second cooldown, this is pretty straightforward. It kind of just makes SuperConduct function like Aggravate, specifically for Miko, in that 1 in every 3 turret hits does more damage. But then there's the C1 buff for SuperConducts that gives the team plus 50 Electro%. Now this is actually quite nice because one of the big things that I got you all to commit to memory back when we were talking about Dendro teams, well, you remember what it was? Let's say it together: Aggravate, love, damage, percent, and crit. But again, we're talking about damage percent. Now why would we ever want to bring a cryo character to our Aggravate teams and turn it into a Rimegrass one? Well, this would actually be a solid reason. In International, we can replace Shillidan with a cryo character like C60 Yoda and give some more EM. Layla, who I think has more application, a stronger shield. C4 is kind of slightly meaningful maybe, I don't know. Rosaria is an option for more crit rate if you need that. Sandy or Odette, if you are skillful enough, obviously will make the team the absolute strongest that it can possibly be. Cryo and Dendro can coexist. When Electro hits it, we get a SuperConduct and a Quicken simultaneously. Electro and Dendro can coexist, with enough Electro that is. When Cryo hits it, we actually do get a SuperConduct. So, one of the advantages of someone like Layla over someone like Sucrose, Kaz, or Shillidan, to a lesser extent of course, is that Layla would be significantly easier to play and maintain the buff, as long as you actually use her skill or ult every 10 seconds. Sucrose and Kaz need there to be an underlying Electro aura coexisting with the Dendro in order to swirl it and thus provide things like VV and Kaz's damage percent buff. Shillidan, on the other hand, would need a similar aura just to be able to give an Electro scroll. And in a Quicken team with Nahida in particular, that has always been famously kind of tricky. Not impossible, but kind of tricky sometimes. But someone like Layla can just keep the SuperConducts going anyway, whether she's triggering it or it's Lisa or Miko actually triggering those reactions. In doing so, she's basically maintaining Miko's C1 buff, giving both the Electro Mages plus 50 Electro%, which, by the way, is more than an Electro Scroll buff. Now, make no mistake, Cryo support isn't necessarily stronger than Sucrose, Kaz, or Shillidan. But if, for example, you're going up against Swanee in the Abyss, or let's say the Ball boss from the Moon in Stygian, as of recording, dropping Shillidan in favor of the necessary Cryo app is not necessarily going to be the end of the world, thanks of course to that Miko buff. And allegedly, Rimegrass is going to end up being a real thing at some point after the Sarita drops, allegedly. That's what I'm hearing anyway. So I, for one, am looking quite forward to seeing what comes out of it, if anything does.
Mine's a command. My guiding star.
Come a little closer.
Committed to memory. Not now. Don't be scared.
Let's spark things right here. Emerge.
Share my knowledge. The night is cold.
Come a little closer. Right here, right now, right here.
Stars, shine for me. Grow.
You're in for a little shock.
A sight to behold.
Right now, emerge.
Committed to memory. Not now.
Come a little closer. You've been a naughty boy. Try not to enjoy this too much.
Moving on. Miko's C4 is of course a huge deal for her own DPS. I've already talked about this at great length in the Dendro video, so suffice to say, this makes her ER requirements basically non-existent if you're playing with double Electro, which we are. Remember, Electro Resonance does include more particles as part of its effect, and 116 ER on my build with no Favges on a Rimegrass team does still result in Miko's ult coming back in time to actually use it. C2 Shillidan obviously makes Miko's ult hilariously trivial to achieve, when in tandem, of course, with that C4. And of course, if you run any Favge, let's say with Baiju, then that will also make getting Miko's ult absolutely trivial. And then of course, the 100 ult percent does make her ult a lot stronger, because again, Aggravates love damage percent. Of course, the big question is whether Miko's ult is a DPS gain, or is neutral, or is a loss. Well, looking at the two teams that I've been talking about, International is so quick swappy that you have no reason not to use her ult, so just do it. Meanwhile, when I tested the Aggravate Clorinde team with Whimsy, well, without using Miko's ult, I seem to run into a cooldown issue by waiting for Clorinde's skill cooldown to refresh. So perhaps it's because of that, I end up with a 17.5% DPS increase. Somehow I get a small DPS loss on Clorinde in favor of 50% more damage out of Miko, and because of C2 Shillinan, I recommend trying to get Nahida's Shrine out first before going back to Miko and then QEEing so that her ult can get the full power of the EM share from Nahida as well. Let me know in the comments how you went with your testing if you have less investment in your Miko, of course, compared to my C6 Miko. But it really does seem to me that Miko's ult is actually a huge DPS increase, so QEE whenever you can. And finally, we have, of course, the big C2 buff of plus 200 EM for both herself and the on-fielder. Like I mentioned in the previous videos, this is big for Miko and Aggravate teams because her Aggravates do more damage, her turrets get plus 30 skill percent from her A4, and since Aggravates love damage percent, that's even more damage for those Aggravate reactions. The big thing, of course, is the EM buff for the on-fielder. Looking at the characters I mentioned in this video, Lisa simply gets more damage via her Aggravates. As far as I can tell, Nahida's A4 takes the EM buff into account while she's on field, so that means she will get more crit rate and damage percent until, of course, she reaches 1000 EM. My Deepwood Nahida under her own Shrine of Maya has 945 EM. I believe the Shrine counts as well, so this buff wouldn't be super relevant. But my GT build has 200 less EM, give or take, so this buff would actually be super relevant during her short on-field time. Clorinde's Aggravates would do more damage. In particular, if you actually got C1 Clorinde, those extra hits from that constellation are seemingly designed for Aggravate reactions. Sethos' A4 passive gives his normal attacks and Duststalker bolts a heap of EM scaling, on top of the Aggravates of course doing more damage. And Sethos gets more EM scaling in his kit. We are of course talking about his charge attack. We're also talking about when he ults, his normal attacks get converted into Dusk Bolts that get additional EM scaling, and his A4 gives a temporary buff on a 15-second cooldown that makes his special charge attacks get even more EM scaling. All of this on top of the Aggravates that he does doing more damage. All of this to say, I feel like it's entirely possible that C2 Miko is actually on par with Fischl in an Aggravate team, and that's huge, because Fischl famously just does a lot of Electro hits, of course via things like her C6, but also a non-Be Thy Sinful Hex, which of course results in a lot of Aggravates. The difference between level 80 and level 90 Fischl is around 28% DPS. I'm lazy and I haven't ascended my Fischl past level 80 out of 80. Right now, my C6 R1 Miko is doing 2.6 times the DPS of my theoretical level 90 Fischl with the exact same build running R5 Skyharp. Hell, even when I don't use Miko's ult at all, thus ignoring the C4 buff and C5 entirely, she's apparently doing 1.84 times the DPS of my theoretical Fischl. Now, KQM thinks that C6 by itself is actually between a 22 and 30% DPS increase, so let's just take out the full 30%, and therefore Miko is doing 1.29 times the DPS of my theoretical level 90 Fischl. Finally, there's talent level increases from C3, where the attack scaling of her turrets goes up by 18%, so doing some bad math, I think, results us in still doing 1.09 times the damage of Fischl. Now, I suppose if I were to actually level 90 Fischl, I would probably also crown Oz, so that would make Fischl do 11% more DPS by crowning Oz, because currently her talent level is level 11, so theoretically C2 Miko would be doing slightly less personal damage than Fischl in the Aggravate team. In fact, when I did all of the napkin math and plugged in some numbers and used the calculator and all that jazz, I think I ended up with about 3k less DPS on C2 Miko compared to, of course, to Fischl in the Aggravate team. But Clorinde was actually getting affected by Miko's C2 and was doing another 3k DPS compared, of course, to Clorinde with Fischl on the team. So this does seem to bridge the gap between Miko and Fischl's DPS. And that's all assuming we're not using Miko's ult at all, which I think is damage left on the table for no reason. All of this to say, if you have C2 Miko, just play her instead of Fischl and have a great time. Really curious how other people's testing goes with this, because obviously all I can do is just napkin math, so I could be wrong, but I don't know. Anyway, one thing I definitely do know is the difference between pre and post buff C5 Miko, at least for international, so here's the comparison that we have been doing in every video in this series. Yeah, after this part of the rotation, I kind of don't know. It's kind of just random as hell.
Try not to enjoy this too much.
And I can actually play on-field Lisa unironically.
You've been a naughty boy.
And I can do that too. Do that too, and bang! My 3 Kategari stats like this. I think that C4 for Miko is kicking in big time. Lisa didn't crit. I still have Fischl and buffs active, I think. Oh, that actually ran out just then. Whoops. Booyah! You've been a naughty boy. Also, I've got to remember that C2 Miko is kicking in as well, which means that nearly double whoever's on field also gets 200 EM. Which means even without C6, you're telling me this team is now doing 130, 128k DPS? God damn! Oh, we love that! For artifacts in this team archetype, I think I'll be repeating what I said in the Dendro video. Sticking with Golden Troop if you hate her old, or Gilded Dreams would of course be the play. That being said though, I continue to not have a Gilded Dreams build that's nearly as good as my 2-piece Generalist build, so I think I'll stick with that. Attack Electro Crit continues to be the stronger option, especially if you have C2 Miko. Even without her C4 though, I probably wouldn't bother building ER for her ult, just use it whenever it shows up instead, which is probably every other rotation. I think that'll do it for this video, and this is of course the final video in the series looking at how the Miko buffs affect different team archetypes. I feel like when it comes to Electro, I always have a lot more to yap about, so this one's going to be longer, of course. But Miko does seem to be opening up some buffs for Rimegrass as well, so when that comes out, of course the big EM buff coming from her C2, look, she does seem to be a pretty strong character in these Aggravate teams. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. What kind of Aggravate team do you like to play? And maybe Miko is going to be a mainstay in that kind of Aggravate team as well, especially with a C2. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoy this. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and as always, until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Right here, emerge. Commit it to memory. Share my knowledge.
Into the shadows.
Good. Keith, did you honestly think that would hit me?
Time to testify.
Peace.
To the echoes of the valley.
Grow, grow, grow. Nothing lasts forever. Right here, emerge. Right here.
Ready. Shoot on sight.
Would you rather wallow in this rotten, decaying world?